Well, as we launch this new message series this morning, I want to invite you to think about something with me this morning. I want you to think about all the decisions you make during any given day. So just take a normal day out of your life and think about all the decisions that you make during those days. Some days the decisions are routine, some days not so much. It starts first thing in the morning. I mean, let's be honest, we all make the decision whether we're going to hit the snooze button one more time or not, right? And then we have to get up and get ready. And so for some of us, that's huge because we have to decide how we're going to do our hair for the day. For some of us, not so huge, but you know what I mean, right? Then you have to decide, okay, what am I going to do at work? I'm going to do this. What am I having for dinner, for lunch? What am I having for dinner? All these decisions that we have to make during the day. Some are very routine, like I said. Some are hard. They're seasonal, and they're big decisions in life that we have to make. Every once in a while, I'm confronted with one of those decisions. Amy says I suffer from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and every once in a while I can be a little obsessive. One of the hardest decisions I ever have to make is at the gas pump sometimes. You know what I mean? Check this out. You see what I'm saying? Like the thing clicks, and you're at $39.99, or an even 10 gallons, right? So one way or another, I'm not going to win. Some of you are like, what is he talking about? But some of you get me, right? Raise your hand if you get me. These are my people. See? You get me. Other big decisions we have to make during the day. Amy and I, we have the hardest time deciding where we're going to eat. This meme fits us perfectly. If two people love each other, nothing is impossible except deciding where to eat. Do I have my people out there with me on this too? Listen, I've got a solution for you. This is amazing. Someone suggested this to Amy and I, so we did this. Are you familiar with Fisher-Price toys See and Say? So you pull the handle down, it goes to an animal, the animal makes the sound. It's for 2-year-olds, I get it, on identifying an animal and the sound. But look what we did. We replaced the animals with some of our favorite restaurants. And so now we just pull the handle, and we don't pay attention to what it says, but wherever it lands, today we are going to Rose's. Anybody want to go? Right? I did this in the 9:30 service. I kid you not, it landed on Chick-fil-A. On a Sunday. Big problems. I want to take you to a place in the Bible where we have to make a choice. So if you got your Bible with you this morning, or you can use the one in the seats in front of you, if you got your phone and you want to click on your Bible app, I would invite you to go to Joshua chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24. Now you may not recognize it by the verse, but when I read this verse, you're going to recognize it because it's a very famous verse out of the Bible. And so I'm going to read bits and pieces of verse 15. It says, choose this day whom you will serve. You see the choice? Choose this day whom you will serve. And here's the part that's popular. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Right? Like, so how many of you have seen that before on a bumper sticker or a plaque or a painting or a picture? Some of you probably have it hanging in your house. And it's very popular. It's one of the most popular verses of Scripture that we like to recite and say and repeat. But our question this morning is this. It can be hanging on the walls, but are we really living it in our halls? It can be hanging in our house, but are we really living it in our house? You see, let me give you a little bit more of the context here. This is Joshua is presenting the choice to us and then making the declaration about him and his family. The context is that Moses was the man that was chosen by God to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt, and he leads them into the wilderness, and Moses never leads them into the promised land. Instead, Moses leads the people in the wilderness for 40 years. At some point near the end of those 40 years, Moses calls 12 gentlemen together, 12 spies. They go into the promised land to spy it out, to seek it out. And out of those 12, 10 come back and say, oh my gosh, there are giants in the promised land. We would never be able to beat them. We would never be able to defeat them. There were only 2 that came back and said, yes, there are giants, but God has given us this land. Let's go for it. Those 2 were Caleb and Joshua. Moses dies, and Joshua becomes the leader of the people. And he leads them into the promised land. They take down Jericho and then all of these other cities and all these other peoples. And then they divide up and they have all the land in the promised land. And the entire book of Joshua is that story. The story of the people taking the promised land. And at the end of the book, here in chapter 24, Joshua is about to die. And so he's giving his last hurrah to the people, his last speech to the people, his last pep rally to the people. And he begins to tell them all this. We didn't read all of chapter 24, but he begins to tell them all about their story, all about their history. He talks to them about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Esau. He talks about the Red Sea and the Jordan River. Then he talks about all these people groups that they conquered. He talks about the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the termites. I mean, he wanted to get them all in there, all right? And then he ends his message with a call to make a choice. He says, you have to choose today who you're going to serve. And he makes this declaration, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Now, I would say that here, all these thousands of years since Joshua gave that call, we've been called to make the same choice. Or we've at least been presented with the same option. And I just love how the story goes that, Joshua's given the whole story and telling everything. And then at the end, it's like this roaring call to action. Like, are any of you familiar with parliamentary procedure? I learned parliamentary procedure in high school, a small school, Future Farmers of America, right? And you have this thing that you do, and I'm the sentinel, stationed by the door, right? And you learn about parliamentary procedure. And I learned about how to make a motion and how to amend the motion and how to table the motion and how to, point of question, point of order, you're out of order, point of order. There's this thing in parliamentary procedure, and if you're a parliamentarian, and I messed this up, I apologize ahead of time, but there's this thing in parliamentary procedure that's called call the question. And what that means is when there's debate on the floor or there's argument or discussion on the floor and you're sitting back and you're tired of all the debate and the argument, you can stand up and say, I called the question. Like, enough. All right? Quit arguing, quit debating, hey, let's take a vote. And that's exactly what Joshua is doing. He's like, listen, I could go on and on and on and on about our story, but hey, call the question. You have a choice to make. You can choose God or you can choose other gods. And that same choice is presented to us today, that same call to action, that same question. But let me tell you the state of where we're at in our culture in terms of answering that question. If that question is presented to us today, and it is, how are we as a culture answering that question? Let me give you some latest statistics. 3 out of every 5 kids choose to walk away from their faith when they leave their parents' home. 60% of all millennials, that's roughly 1980-ish to 1996, born in those years, 60% of them are walking away from the church. 13% of Gen Z, that's 1996 to 2010-ish, profess themselves as atheists. 13%, is that really that much? When you compare it to the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, it's a lot. 13%, the trend is going up. 40% of adults are walking away from the church. In their adulthood, 40% of adults are walking away from the church, and not just church contained within the walls, but any expression of church. Last night, I was at the football game, and it was alumni band weekend at the game. And so the alumni band was there to play in the stands, and they also got to march at halftime. And I like to stay at halftime and watch the band, and I supported the alumni band. It makes me feel better about how I look, and so I enjoyed watching the alumni band. But I got to thinking last night watching the alumni band, man, in the church, we've got a lot of alumni. I don't mean they've gone on to heaven. I mean, like they used to be part of the church and they're no longer part of the church. Like they've walked away from every expression of the church. Like the alumni band used to be part of the going band. Like they were part of the going band. Like they got to wear the fancy uniform. They were part of the going band. And then they got old. And they could no longer be part of the going band, part proper. They still have identification with the going band, but they're no longer in the band. You see, we have a lot of people in our culture that want to identify with Christ, but they're no longer part of the church. And I know, the old secret, hey, listen, standing in your garage doesn't make you a car any more than standing in church makes you a Christian. I get that, and I believe it. But I also believe this. I can be married and not sleep in the same room with my wife, but it sure is a lot better if I do. You get it? 40% of adults are walking away from any expression of the church, and those who still identify as Christian are only attending church less than 12 times a year on average. And we hear those statistics, and they may just go over our head, but some of them sit with us and go, ouch. And we begin to look around, and we begin to get real with those things, and we begin to blame a lot of different people. Like it's never our fault, right? So we're going to begin to blame other people and the reason for the downfall and the reason people are walking away from the church and the reason our young people don't want to have anything to do with it anymore and the reason they're saying that they're atheists. And we say, oh, it's Hollywood's fault. It's all Hollywood's fault. Hollywood's done this and this and this and this and they're on TV all the time and all the time and all the time and they're saying this and this and this. It's government's fault. Everything's government's fault, right? It's politics' fault. Everything, let's just blame it on the government. Let's blame it on our schools because we can no longer pray in the schools. We can no longer pray before football games. It's the school's fault. It's the college and university's fault because they don't teach Christianity anymore. They teach evolution and all this kind of good stuff. It's the school's fault. It's the college's fault. It's the university. It's our culture's fault. It's the movies we're made to watch. It's the music we're made to listen to. It's the video games we're made to play, right? We can place blame anywhere. But I want you to notice in Joshua chapter 24, Joshua did not say, let Hollywood decide. He did not say, let Washington, D.C. decide. He did not say, let your university decide. He did not say, let the culture decide. He said, let the family decide. That's the core of the problem. That's the core of the issue. Family is God's design and God's ideal. And what we're seeing, I believe this with all my heart, and I can believe it with personal experience to back it up, is that we're seeing a breakdown of God's ideal for the family, God's design for the family. Because of my role as a pastor, my wife, Amy, she works as a school counselor. She's an LPC who works as a school counselor. We can have a conversation every single day at our house about a horrible situation, a tragic circumstance, just frustration to no end. And every single time, we can trace it to a breakdown in the family unit. Every single time. Listen, including ours. Including mine, my extended family, and my family, my nuclear family. God's design was not for the government or our education systems or our community systems to make this choice. God's design was for the family to make the choice. And Joshua declares it by saying, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And I love what happens in Joshua chapter 24. The people respond to Joshua. I'm going to read part of this to you. It's going to be up on the screen. They start in verse 16. Then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us up and our fathers from the land of Egypt out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us in all the way that we went and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples and the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord our God. Man, this is where applause broke out. People started dancing even though they couldn't dance. They started singing even though they couldn't sing. Joshua was clapping and praising over the people. Is that what happened? You would think that's what happened, but that's not what happened. Keep reading. So Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. What? He's just given the greatest speech of his life, the biggest pep rally of his life. He's called the people to make this choice. They've made the choice that he's wanting them to make. At least they vocalized the choice that he's wanting them to make. And then he says, oh, wait, never mind, because you can't do it. Now, what do you think the people were thinking at this time? The same thing you're thinking, right? Where's Joshua going with this? What does this mean? I don't understand. Joshua was just merely, remember how the whole chapter, Joshua 24, is the history of the people. So Joshua can't help but bring up their history. And if you keep reading in Joshua 24, he's going to tell them their history of not being able to serve the Lord, even though they say they are. In other words, they had the plaque hanging on the wall, but the way they were living in the halls was anything but. They had the saying down, they had the bumper sticker on the camel, but they weren't living life like that. You with me? You following me? He's saying, you're not able. And in fact, he's probably saying, let me bring to mind Exodus 32. Remember when your leader Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, the laws that you were supposed to follow. And Moses was on the mountain for a long time. Takes a while to write in stone. And he took some time to get back down. And before he got back down from the mountain, you lost your patience with Moses, aka you lost your patience with God. And remember, you summoned all the people to bring their gold together, and they had it melted down, and they made this golden calf, and you put the golden calf in front of you, and then all of you began to bow down and worship the golden calf. You remember that? Yeah. Remember that. You remember at that time how you said God was the only God and you were going to serve him and follow him with all your heart, but yet you melted down your gold like that to make a golden calf and follow the golden calf. Yes, we remember. You're right. We're not really able to say that. We're not really able to do that. This idol thing was a big deal in the Old Testament. I want to read to you this morning. It's not going to be up on the screen, but I want you to just listen. This is talking about idols. Remember, Moses finally came down from the mountain. He got so mad that people were worshiping the golden calf, he broke the 10 Commandments. Like, I don't mean like he didn't follow the law. I meant like he literally broke the tablets. He was so upset. So they had to remake them and all this kind of good stuff. Anyway, the first of the 10 Commandments, don't worship any other God but God alone. God took that serious. Listen, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 16. Beware, lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, in the likeness of male or female, for the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, listen, you will be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Now look, I know that we're not going to, before we leave here this morning, bring all of our gold and melt it down and put a golden calf up here and begin to worship the golden calf. And I know that most of you don't have things like that in your homes that you bow down to and worship, whether it's a winged or something that flies, crawls along the ground. I know that you're not associating with Deuteronomy chapter 4. But listen, here's what Deuteronomy says. We will be drawn away and seduced into worshiping something other than the God. Jesus affirms this. By the time Jesus came onto the scene, there were no longer just 10 commandments. There were something like 631 commandments. 631. You thought things at school were bad, right? 631 commandments that the people had to follow. Do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. 631. And so one day an attorney comes to Jesus. Leave it to the attorney, right? Sorry if I offended anybody. Comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, can you just make this a whole lot easier for us? What's the most important commandment? Right? What's the most important? 631. It's impossible, Jesus. Can you just boil it down to one commandment? And Jesus said, yeah, I can. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And before the attorney could speak, Jesus said, oh, and there's a second one that's as equally important. Not first and second, but there's a second one that's equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Man, in October, I can't wait. We're going to do a whole sermon series called How to Neighbor, but we're not there today. Here's where we are today. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. With all your heart. Matthew chapter 6 says that where our treasure is, there our heart will be. Am I being seduced into worshiping something other than the God? I don't know. I have to answer the question, where's my treasure? Because there's where my heart is. With all your soul, in other words, all your devotion, all your loyalty, everything. Is that my everything? With all your mind, where do I spend the most time thinking? What do I spend the most time thinking about? Who do I spend the most time thinking about? With all my strength. The question is, where do I spend all my energy? Listen, I can boil it down to you in a very simple question. Write this down. Here it is. Where do I spend my time, my talent, and my treasure? Where do I spend my time, my talent, and my treasure? Listen, you honestly answer that question. Don't just hang a plaque on the wall. You honestly answer that question, and you've made your choice. That's who you're serving. That's who you're worshiping. That's who you're loving. And if we are honest this morning, including myself from the platform, there are places in our lives where you've been seduced into worshiping things and people other than the God. Man, it would take me all day to go through the list. For some of us, it's our careers, it's our work. We pursue it with all of our time, our talent, and our treasure. We put everything into it, and there's where we're at. That's where we're worshiping. That's where we're serving. For some of us, it's fame, it's success. We want our name out there. We want to be in the headlines. We want people to know us. We want people to recognize us, and we put all of our time, talent, and treasure into that. For some of us, it's our kids. These gifts from God. That we put all of our time and talent and treasure into it, and before you know it, the devil is so sneaky, he seduced us into worshiping them instead of God. Now listen, I'm not saying that any of those things are necessarily wrong. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying what Joshua said. And he said, all right, if you really want to put feet to your mouth, if you really want to do what you're saying, he said, verse 23, then put away the foreign gods. Put away the idols. Put away the things you have been seduced into worshiping. And incline. Remember Deuteronomy chapter 4? You've been seduced and bow down. That word incline there means to bow down. Bow down your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. Here's what it means. It means quit hanging the sign on the wall and living differently in the hall. Quit putting the bumper sticker on your car or the fish on your trunk and living a different way. Joshua would say it this way, choose today whom you will serve. Not these false gods that you've been seduced into worshiping, but the one true God. I can make it real easy for you this morning. Like on this side, it's God. On this side, it's idols. Your job, my job this morning, is to pull the handle in our heart and be honest with where the arrow is pointing. I'm going to pray over us. Just ask that you close your eyes and pray this with me. God, the choice before us this morning is simple. Whom will we serve? Will we follow the tendency of those around us and devote our time, talent, and treasure to anything and anyone but you? Will we only pay attention to you when we're in trouble or when it suits us the best? Will we continue to play church and hope that's good enough? Or are we as families ready to commit ourselves fully to serving you? God, this morning, help us to see with pure eyes, with fresh eyes, the places we've made these golden calves. God, the places in our life where we've hung the plaque on the wall, but we're living a totally different life. God, bring it to mind. Help us to see it. May we confess and repent and say today, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. So the prayer team is going to be up here this morning. The band is going to lead a song. Here's what I would ask you to do. The prayer team is always available. If you need prayer for anything, come and see them. If you need prayer as a family, come and see them. This morning, for the husbands and fathers in the room, for those that are in living rooms watching online, I'm asking you to take the lead, to grab your family. Pray together where you're at, or come to the front as a family and say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We confess that we've been chasing after these other things and worshiping after these other things, and today we're making a change. We're taking a stance, we're calling the question, and we are going to choose to serve the Lord. Listen, if that's not you, if you're a single mom, if you're divorced, if you're widowed, if you're co-parenting, if you're a blended family, it doesn't matter. We're all family. You are family. Maybe look around the room, someone that doesn't have someone with them, or maybe you just want to come down to the front yourself, but take a stand today. Say, it is up